The final item of business today is members' business debate on motion 19772 in the name of Rona Mackay on 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. And this debate will be concluded without any questions being put. Would those members who wish to speak in the debate please press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Rona Mackay to open the debate for around 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Firstly, can I thank everyone from across the Chamber who supported my motion and who will contribute to tonight's debate. Normally, it's customary for speakers to say they're delighted to be taking part in a members' debate, but I don't think that's particularly appropriate here, because I wish we didn't have to have this debate every year, because every year we highlight the terrible statistics that show that violence against women is still the scourge of our society. So it's crucial that organisations around the world that support the 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence campaign are heard, and that's why it's important that this is debated in Scotland's Parliament. Started by activists at the inaugural Women's Global Leadership Institution in 1991, this event runs from the 25th of November to the 10th of December and highlights the work done by many organisations around the world who call for the prevention and elimination of violence against women and girls. But highlighting awareness and preventative work should not end on December the 10th. It must be taken forward every day while women are being abused. Presiding Officer, it's been 20 years since violence against women in Scotland was first debated at the Scottish Parliament. That's a debate on this subject every year, at least, since the Scottish Parliament has been in existence. Of course, movements over the course of those 20 years, more recently Me Too, Time's Up and Not One More, and the tireless efforts of individual women speaking out have brought the issue of institutionalised gender inequalities to the forefront of societal thinking. But we know there's still much to be done. Currently, levels of violence against women remain alarmingly high. It's estimated that 1 in 3 women will experience violence in their lifetime, and in 2017 to 18, there were 59,541 domestic abuse incidents reported to Police Scotland, of which 82% were women. That is totally unacceptable. It's time to recognise that the issue of gender-based violence is not some isolated problem. It's caused by gender inequality and augmented by other forms of inequality. It's a societal issue that impacts us all. And of course, it's a global issue. Whether it's acid disfigurement, female genital mutilation, slavery, sexual violence, trafficking, coercive abuse, and more, it beggars belief that women throughout the world are continuing to suffer horrendously in 2019. As co-convener of the cross-party group Violence Against Women and Girls, a group that strives to eliminate all aspects of gender-based violence, working in partnership with Women's Aid and many other organisations, we recognise that gender inequality cannot be separated from other forms of inequality. Primary prevention should address all forms of inequality, and tackling gender-based violence should not be left to women. Men must join us in calling out this vile behaviour. They must not turn a blind eye to what's happening. This behaviour must never be normalised, and future generations must know that it cannot be tolerated. Only by building coordinated partnerships aimed at tackling inequality at every level can we begin to reduce the incidence of violence against women. We must all make a conscious and collective effort to challenge racism, homophobia, transphobia and classism, and strive to promote social and economic justice. Presiding Officer, we know that violence against women knows no boundaries. It happens at home and very often in the workplace. The perpetrators and the victims come from all backgrounds. But we also know that the most marginalised women in our society can be more susceptible to violence due to the other forms of oppression, such as poverty, addiction, cultural practices and sexual exploitation. Only through greater public understanding about the links between violence against women, particularly sexual violence, and these other social inequalities, can we effectively begin to stem the flow of violence against women. That's why it's so important for us, as members of this Parliament, to do all we can to promote these values in our own constituencies. We must ensure we can to promote these values in our own constituencies. We must ensure that we're promoting and normalising gender equality. But of course, we must also celebrate her inspiring Glass Walls art installation, which was designed by Brian Waugh, an award-winning artist, and Charles Proven, part of the artistic team. Charles tailored a rehabilitative 12-week programme on stained glass art for women from the Glasgow-based Daisy Project, which provides support to women who have experienced domestic abuse, and their beautiful work is integral to this exhibition. I warmly welcome Emma and the women from the Daisy Project to the gallery. For those who haven't yet seen it in the Parliament's garden lobby, the Glass Walls project is a collaborative community art project which aims to raise awareness of domestic abuse. The work is open to the public in Glasgow City Council chambers next week. Ms Forbes' PhD thesis explored victims' experiences of the court process and accessing justice, which we know has been far from perfect at many levels, and I hope the highly publicised focus on their experience will lead to much needed improvement. The artwork depicts the progress that has been made over the years in Scotland to address domestic abuse, whilst also highlighting the challenges that those who have experienced abuse still face. Put simply, it gives victims a voice. On the glass, you'll see the inscriptions, "Why can't I be believed?" And "My word isn't actually enough for what he's done to me over the years." Well, I'm sure I speak for everyone in the chamber and everyone watching when I say we do believe you and your word is enough. Presiding Officer, on positive role models, as ever, we're indebted to the many fantastic organisations such as Zero Tolerance. Presiding Officer, on positive role models, as ever, we're indebted to the many fantastic organisations such as Zero Tolerance, Women's Aid, Rape Crisis, Close Debate, Zero Tolerance will be showing their animation It's Time for Prevention in room TG20 in the Parliament from 6:30 to 7 p.m. tonight. The Domestic Abuse Scotland Bill was a groundbreaking piece of legislation which recognised coercive control for the first time. The Equally Safe strategy, which was developed in 2014 by the Scottish Government and COSLA, released an update to its delivery plan this week. It reported significant activity and progress in relation to many actions, and some key pieces of work are highlighted within the report, which I'm sure the Minister will expand on in her closing speech. So to conclude, Presiding Officer, we must stand together for all the women and girls throughout the world who've lost their lives through gender-based violence, women who have been abused and degraded, mentally scarred and traumatised. And together, we must never stop calling out those who perpetrate such acts of inhumanity. Thank you.
Can I say to those in the public gallery that would prefer it if you didn't show appreciation or otherwise? Thank you very much. And we move to the open debate. Speeches of 4 minutes, please. Claudia Beamish, followed by Emma Harper.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And thank you to Rona Mackay for bringing this debate as part of the 16 days of action. This annual occasion is a sad but valuable opportunity, as she says, to discuss the impact of gender-based violence on individuals and society as a whole, and to highlight the work being done to change attitudes. I apologise for having to leave soon after speaking, but it's unavoidable for another event. I would like to also congratulate Emma Forbes for the amazing glass walls of visual dedication in the Parliament to all women who have suffered from domestic abuse. As a co-convener of the cross-party group Men's Violence Against Women and Children with Rona Mackay and John Finney, I'm determined to prioritise helping to continue to tackle domestic violence, along with so many other individuals and organisations. This year's theme of Generation Equality Stands Against Rape seems appropriate given the increase in women breaking their silence so bravely in recent years, encouraged in part by the #MeToo campaign. However, having the courage to speak out can only be part of the sea change we need. The organisation Zero Tolerance has quoted that 95% of rapes in 2014 to 15 had a woman victim. This is a staggering statistic. Rape is about power, and it is no surprise that inequality between genders exposes women to the greater risk of domestic violence. The recent rape crisis meeting, which I attended, I left from and personally committed to working alongside those brave women who are exposed to the injustice of a third verdict of not proven, leaving everyone in limbo, and will work to help remove this injustice from our society and from our justice system. I'm also committed to working to ensure, along with others, that there is better support in relation to court appearances. In recent years, as glaringly exposed, we live in a society that still makes excuses in some cases for sexual violence. It is not enough for rape to be illegal, or indeed coercive control, in which Scotland has led the way in criminalising. Only when we address the underlying causes that reinforce inequality can we see a real reduction in these appalling statistics. But despite this bleak backdrop, there is tremendous work being done by organisations committed to change. And today I want to recognise some of them. The White Ribbon Campaign, which works with male perpetrators, and also the Soroptimists International, who highlight the plight of an estimated 200 million people who have undergone female genital mutilation, and women and girls who are trafficked and subjected to exploitation and to abuse. So the Commission for Women of the Kurdistan National Congress has used International Day for Elimination of Violence against women to highlight this continuing violence in northern and eastern Syria. And they have called on UN Women to defend women-led democracy, which is a key to preventing violence. Closer to home, Rape Crisis Support has launched their biggest ever crowdfunder, £16 for 16 days. Donations of £16, which will help the 1,035 survivors of sexual violence across Scotland who are awaiting access to their support. Close the Gap has developed Equally Safe at Work, which we have all heard of, I'm sure, which has been piloted in 7 local authorities, 2 of which, Midlothian and South Lanarkshire, in my region of South Scotland. And this, of course, looks to address women's labour inequality. Turning to refuges, the Dogs Trust campaign will make it possible for pets to go into temporary foster care, removing abusive partner leverage. And this is welcome, and especially in view of the importance of pets in these complex situations to children. And Scottish Labour's pause clause calls for allowing those who are forced into temporary accommodation to keep their pets. And I ask today that this is considered by all women's refuges across Scotland. As elected representatives, Zero Tolerance asks us to seek out and promote positive models while challenging harmful stereotypes and roles in terms of gender. Debates like today allow us to celebrate the wonderful organisations all working in their various fields to the same goal. But we are also reminded that we all have a responsibility to drive societal change needed to stop gender-based sexual violence. Thank you.
Emma Harper, followed by Margaret Mitchell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the opportunity to speak in this important debate on 16 days of activism against gender-based violence and congratulate my friend and colleague Rona Mackay for bringing it forward and her excellent detailed contribution as well. I've given prior notice to the Presiding Officer that I may need to leave early depending on what time the closing speeches are. But from the start, I want to record that violence in any form against anyone is never acceptable and must be called out, particularly when the violence is simply because of a person's gender or indeed a person's gender identity. This international campaign, which seeks to end gender-based violence, has been ongoing for the past 2 decades and was originally started by the United Nations General Assembly. And I commend all, both in Scotland and around the world, who have been involved with the campaign year in, year out. Your work really does help others speak out and report violence and domestic abuse. The theme of 2019, Orange is the World, Generation Equality Stands Against Rape, places a focus on those who have experienced or who have been affected by rape. Presiding Officer, domestic abuse and gender-based violence can take many forms and can affect anyone. It can stem from simple controlling comments, such as a partner telling another what to wear or telling them what to do, or even what to say, to unwanted sexual comments, acts and violence. Although gender-based violence and domestic abuse predominantly affects women, with around 4 in 5 of all domestic abuse cases in Scotland involving a female victim, I would like to focus on domestic abuse among Scotland's LGBT community as well, as rates of which are estimated to be on the rise and cases which they're also generally underreported. Recent research published by Stonewall Scotland revealed that some stats which aren't easy to read. This research evidences that using the current definition of domestic abuse, which includes coercive and controlling behaviour, physical and sexual assault and financial control, around 49% of gay and bi men in Scotland and around 1 in 4 women who identify as a lesbian, that's about around 80% of Scotland's trans community, they have all experience domestic abuse in some form. It's essential that discussions around domestic abuse, albeit predominantly affecting women, is encompassing other groups and individuals across our diverse society, so that they too know that it is okay to speak out, to report abuse and violence, and to seek advice and support. My ask of the Minister is therefore to ensure that, as well as women being the most affected by domestic abuse and violence, that other groups across our society, such as the LGBT+ community, are also on the radar of the Government. Presiding Officer, Dumfries and Galloway in my South Scotland region, like many rural parts of Scotland, has its own unique challenges when it comes to people reporting domestic abuse and receiving support. But support is out there. Many organisations are working to make it easier for those affected to access advice and support services and report violence and abuse. The Dumfries and Galloway Public Protection Partnership, DGPPP, was established by the Integration Joint Board in 2015. It brings together several local organisations, including Police Scotland, DG Women's Aid, Relationship Scotland and DG LGBT+. So they reach out to people across the region who are at risk of or who have experienced domestic abuse. It's very important for us because we're a wide rural area and we need to support people in the rural area to be able to come forward. They provide advice, they encourage and support people to report any abuse to the police so that necessary follow-up can be acted on and perpetrators are appropriately dealt with. All the organisations who are part of the partnership do absolutely fantastic work day in and day out with public outreach sessions, home visits to affected people and their families, relationship counselling and providing the means for those experiencing gender-based violence to escape the situation. They must all be commended. Presiding Officer, I'd like to put my thanks on the record to the Scottish Government who have brought in world-leading legislation to tackle domestic abuse and support for those affected. And finally, Presiding Officer, I visited the Glass Wall exhibition in Parliament as well at the Members' Block ahead of the debate, and I particularly liked the following statements written on the beautiful glass designs. Live, love and laugh. Indestructible we stand and walk with purpose. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, again, I'd like to welcome this debate and reiterate that gender-based violence and domestic abuse can happen to anyone, and we need to ensure people are supported to speak up and report it. Thank you.
Can I just say to members before we move on, we have a lot of speakers and I don't want to run out of time and have to curtail anyone. So if you could mind the 4-minute speech limit, please. Margaret Mitchell, to be followed by Joan McAlpine.
Presiding Officer, I congratulate Rona Mackay for bringing this timely and important debate to the Parliament this evening. Timely because 25th of November was the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women and marked the start of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. Clearly, GBV and violence against women can take many forms, and I want to cover 3 different aspects, starting with human trafficking. This is a crime often carried out by organised crime groups, which is still most commonly thought of in terms of crossing national borders. Certainly, this was the case with the recent convictions of 4 individuals who trafficked young women from Slovakia into Govan Hill. However, less well understood is the fact that it exists not just interstate but intrastate, and that in our towns and cities, young women are being trafficked within Scotland every day. In order to even begin to tackle and expose these abuses, there must be a concerted effort to raise awareness of the issue among the general public, and also to impress on the public mind that if they see something that doesn't feel or look quite right, then report it. Crime Stoppers provides a mechanism for suspected crime to be reported anonymously if there's a fear of retribution. But it's worth remembering that the police would far rather investigate 10 incidents which turn out not to be sinister than allow one genuine case to slip the net. Turning now to domestic abuse, in response to today's debate, the Charity Dogs Trust issued a briefing which illustrates the strong link between animal abuse and domestic abuse. Perpetrators often threaten to harm family pets in order to intimidate and control their partners. Consequently, victims are reluctant to leave home without their dog, as they know their home is not safe for the pet. In these circumstances, the Freedom Project by the Dog Trust provides a free dog fostering service throughout Scotland to support people fleeing domestic abuse. The dogs are placed in volunteer foster homes, and food and veterinary costs are covered for up to 6 months until their owners are in a safe new home and are able to take their pet back. Presiding Officer, for a number of years now, the British Isles and Mediterranean Region Commonwealth Women Parliamentary Steering Group has sought to raise awareness about gender-based violence by urging men in the region's parliaments to wear a white ribbon on 25th of November to mark International Day for the eradication of violence against women. And on Friday, 6th of December, when this steering group's members meet here in the Scottish Parliament, the issue of sexual harassment and abuse will be discussed. The measures the Scottish Parliament has taken following the results of the anonymous sexual harassment questionnaire will be the subject of a Q&A session. This session will look at positive action to address this kind of abuse, which has attracted much media attention recently within the context of the general election and the vile comments and sinister threats directed at female elected members and candidates alike. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, I again congratulate Rona Mackay for tabling this motion and providing a valuable opportunity to raise awareness about GBV and to highlight the work of the Commonwealth Women's Parliamentarians and charities such as the ones mentioned tonight, the White Ribbon, Women's Aid and the Seroptimists, all the work that they do to tackle this issue.
John McAlpine, followed by Rhoda Grant.
Thank you. I too would like to congratulate Rona Mackay for securing this important debate. I strongly support the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, although I do take issue with the language which can sometimes seem to mask the reality of violence inflicted on women by men. It's important to state this clearly, but far too often male violence is something that we are often too squeamish to call out. To take one example, I looked at a BBC online report from this time last year which managed us to talk about the shocking levels of violence against women without ever defining the demographic causing this crime. It's headlined, "The Women Killed Every Day Around the World," and said an average of 137 women are killed every 24 hours by, quotes, a partner or intimate family member, with no mention of the sex of the perpetrator. Paragraph 3 talks about half of the 87,000 women killed dying at the hands of those closest to them. No mention of males. Paragraph 4 says 30,000 women were killed by an intimate partner. Another 20,000 were killed by relatives. Still no mention of what all these perpetrators have in common. In fact, there is no mention of men in the report at all until halfway down, when it becomes counterintuitive and tells us that despite this, men are actually 4 times more likely to lose their lives as a result of intentional homicide. So we hear about men when they are the victims rather than the perpetrators. Of course, we know that men kill and hurt other men in great numbers, but they also kill and hurt women in great numbers, and it doesn't work the other way around. If we look at the court convictions by sex here in Scotland, 98.5% of the perpetrators of sex crimes were male, and of course the overwhelming majority of the victims were female, and convicted perpetrators of non-sexual violent crime were 88% male. So we must be very careful about framing this as a women's problem. It is a man's problem. Violence against women by men crosses class and it crosses cultures. So while I will always strive to achieve more equality, it will not, in my view, entirely eliminate it. I think it's more sophisticated than that. Finland, which is often held up as a beacon of equality, has one of the highest rates of women being murdered by their male partner. And experts there believe that equality in the labour market hasn't sufficiently challenged power relations in the home. Indeed, the Council of Europe recently suggested that Finland's pursuit of gender-neutral policies in service provision has resulted in women's particular needs being overlooked there. We should, of course, continue to strive for female equality, but we mustn't lose sight of the unique vulnerability of women to violence from men. And it's because they are vulnerable that society still puts the needs of men first. I'm one of the co-conveners of the cross-party group on commercial exploitation, and prostitution is rightly classified by the Scottish Government as a form of violence against women. Any society which gives a green light to the buying and selling of female bodies is a society which puts men's sexual demands before the safety and well-being of women as a whole. The cross-party group recently sent a member to Norway where they saw at first hand how decriminalising the women who sell sex while criminalising men who buy sex reduces demand, reduces the trafficking of women and girls and helps protect them from the violence which is endemic in prostitution. We also live in a society where pornography is not just tolerated but promoted, and because of smartphones is easily available to boys and young men. Pornography contributes to and legitimises negative attitudes towards women and girls, and thanks to sites such as Pornhub, it's mainstream, and the recurring theme is male dominance and female subordination. To quote the feminist academic Julia Long, it doesn't take great cultural awareness to grasp the social meaning of images of women being repeatedly penetrated in every orifice to a chorus of slut, bitch and whore. It provides an endless flow of narratives of women being treated as objects. It's no coincidence that a pornified culture has resulted in more men who kill women using the defence of rough sex to excuse their crimes. This was most recently highlighted tragically in the murder of Grace Millane, the 22-year-old backpacker from Essex who was killed by a date in New Zealand. The website We Can't Consent to This has found that 59 women in the UK were killed by men claiming violent sex was consensual, often involving strangulation. The Guardian reported last year that in 4 out of the last 10 killings of this type, the man had watched porn immediately before or after the killing. Pornography is overwhelmingly made and consumed by men. It is men who exploit the women they traffic into prostitution. It is men who buy and sell these women and girls as johns and pimps. And it is men who kill women and hurt women. Of course, I know that not all men hurt women, and most do not, in fact. I suspect that the growth of euphemistic language about gender-based violence has grown up in an effort to bring male allies on board, which of course reflects the fact that males still hold so much power right across the world. It's not that long ago that the women's liberation movement were dismissed as man-haters, and women talking about their rights felt obliged to say, "I'm not a feminist, but..." It's only when men were told that they could be feminists too and put on a T-shirt that women's rights were taken seriously. However, in conclusion, if you blur the language, you blur the issues. Male allies who want to support women need to take responsibility for male violence, and we all need to call it out for what it is. Thank you very much.
Well, it's quite clear to me that nobody at all is listening to me this evening regarding times. So due to the number of members who wish to speak, I'm minded to accept a motion without notice under Rule 8.14.3 to extend the debate by up to 30 minutes, and I invite Rona Mackay to make such a motion. Move such a motion, sorry.
Moved.
Thank you very much. The question is that the debate be extended by up to 30 minutes. Are we all agreed? That's agreed. Can I say to everyone, I cannot extend the debate any longer than that. So unless people are a bit careful about timing, it could end up we don't even get to hear our wonderful Minister for Equalities. Now, would that not just be terrible? So, I therefore call Rhoda Grant to be followed by John Finney.
I want to thank Rona Mackay for securing this debate and join her in paying tribute to all the organisations that work tirelessly to combat violence against women. And the Parliament has rightly given a degree of priority to violence against women, but there is still much to do. This year's theme is Orange the World, Generation Equality Stands Against Rape, and therefore focuses on rape. And we have an incredibly low rate of rape convictions and lengthy waiting lists for support. And I support Rape Crisis's crowdfunding campaign to provide services, because on a typical day in Scotland, we see 1,000 people waiting for support while services face cuts in funding. And I would encourage people to join that crowdfunding campaign. I would like to speak about other issues as well. In Scotland, we recognise that prostitution constitutes violence against women, but it's still legal to buy women in Scotland. And we know that the civil courts are aiding and abetting domestic abuse by allowing children to be weaponised, but still we don't act on that. But each of these issues could take the whole of our debating time today, and therefore I would urge the Scottish Government to make time to debate and to plot a way forward to end violence against women in Scotland once and for all. Close the Gap in their briefing pointed out the impact of violence against women in the workplace, and it's interesting to note that figures for reporting rape and sexual assault correlate very closely with the number of women reporting sexual harassment and violence in the workplace. Only 22% of survivors report rape and sexual assault to the police, where 80% of those who experience sexual harassment in the workplace do not report it as well. I was also alarmed at Zero Tolerance's briefing that told us that Police Scotland have stopped disaggregating rape by gender. Why on earth has this happened? And it must be changed, because how can we measure violence against women if we don't have any statistics to do that? The underlying reasons for non-reporting rape or sexual assault are the same: the fear of not being believed and the fear that they will be blamed. And there is sadly an acceptance of men's behaviour towards women, and this is starkly shown in the case of my constituent Deanne Fitzpatrick, who was taped to a chair and gagged with parcel tape in a Scottish Government office. Imagine how that feels: the fear and the indignity, not to mention the physical hurt. Yet she is the one that's being disciplined, not the perpetrators of the attack. Boys will be boys. No, it should be the boys will be held accountable for their actions. Could this behaviour ever be acceptable? Apparently so in a Scottish Government office. If this is the Scottish Government leading the way, then we have a very long way to go. Presiding Officer, in Scotland, prostitution is also acceptable, and there is no penalty for buying another human being. This creates the notion that women are for sale. So it's not surprising, therefore, that men take the view across the board, and if one woman is available for sale, all women are made less equal. And if you pay a woman money, then it is okay to rape her. And yes, that's what it is, because you cannot buy consent. In these desperate times, more and more women are being forced into prostitution. And we can dress it up any way we like. We can sanitize it as survival sex, sugar daddies, or free accommodation in exchange for sex. But it's all the same. It's exploitative and it's corrosive, both to the women involved and to the whole of the female population. In countries where buying sex is illegal, they also experience less sexual violence and greater equality, and the gender pay gap closes as well. It is only when women are truly equal that we will see an end to violence against women, and we need to fight against inequality everywhere we see it.
John Finney, followed by Beatrice Wishart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's customary to congratulate the individual who brings the members' debate, but I absolutely recognise Rona Mackay's comments there, but I do thank her for bringing the debate. And debate we must. We've heard some very hard-hitting comments, and I would align myself with everything I've heard thus far, not least the issue of gender inequality that drives this. This is about the role of men. This is the role that men should play in resolving issues. This isn't women's problem. This is a societal problem caused by gender inequality. It really is as simple as that. Now, I'm proud to be a member of the cross-party group in men's violence against women and girls, and I'd also like to join the many others who congratulate all the organisations that fight very hard to protect the women and girls in our community. And like my colleague Claudia Beamish and others here, indeed Rona Mackay, I was at the rape crisis meeting and heard very, very powerful testimony. And you know, we can get briefings, we can get all sorts of information, but hearing from the individual's mouth who's been wronged is extremely powerful. And the one thing that was apparent, that people feel let down by our judicial system when someone has to recourse to civil litigation because the criminal justice system has failed them, then we need to look at that. And what we need to look at is the disproportionate number of prosecutions for serious sexual crimes, indeed sexual crimes that result in a not proven verdict. So I certainly, henceforth, am very happy to lend my support to the abolition of that. What I would like to touch on is and it was mentioned earlier, is Rape Crisis, £16 for 16 days campaign, and I would encourage everyone to contribute what they can to that. And it's very important because they want to have an impact on waiting lists, and the figure was mentioned earlier there, and the figure is 1 1,035 individuals this year who, compared to the 582 last year, were waiting for access to what's referred to as Lifeline. And that's what it is, Lifeline rape crisis support. Now, someone at the very front line of this described that to me as astonishing and worrying. I think it's the mark of the trauma that people have to deal with and what they put up with, that is a euphemism. I think it's an astonishing and disgraceful figure. I'd like to read, and I've sanctioned to do this, obviously wouldn't do anything to identify an individual, but the consequences for individuals affected by that dearth of crisis support. One said, and I quote here, "I was a mess, felt like I couldn't start healing. No one to talk to, all going on in my head. I was self-harming, suicide attempts. I felt isolated and my head was exploding." Another said, "I feel abandoned. I'm left with all this stuff in my head and the only way I can deal with it is to deny it's real. I know that this is just adding more to the trauma I've suffered for 44 years, excuse me, and I don't know if I'll survive until I get help." Another, "Following the assessment which brought up many painful memories, I needed to talk to someone who understood sexual assault. Due to the long wait, I was left isolated with suppressed memories and feelings to cope with. I had nobody to turn to. When counselling began, it opened old wounds and caused so much pain, it felt as if the assault had just occurred, having required several GP appointments and telephone counselling during the wait." That's an unsatisfactory situation in a progressive liberal democracy, that victims of crime have to put up with that. So I had many, many things to say. I think I'll conclude with that, but just thank all the organisations for their support. Thank you.
Beatrice Wishart, followed by Ruth Maguire.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I thank Rona Mackay for bringing this important debate forward, and I congratulate Emma Forbes too. I'm pleased to speak in the debate and add my voice to those here and around the world in a call to prevent and end violence against women and girls. On Monday, I went to an event organised by the Shetland Domestic Abuse Partnership where Dr. Mary Hepburn, a consultant obstetrician and gynaecologist, gave a talk. I'm sure some of you here may know of her, as she established the Glasgow Women's Reproductive Health Service. She led specialist support service for pregnant women experiencing multiple forms of disadvantage through homelessness, poverty, domestic abuse and rape. The guidelines she established in the clinic are now used worldwide. And this was the first in a series of events in Shetland to mark 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. The Lerwick Town Hall clock was lit up in orange to mark the start of the 16 days. Dr. Hepburn's retired to Shetland, where she grew up, and she recently joined the board of Shetland Women's Aid. I too am a member of that board. Dr. Hepburn talked of her experience of working with disadvantaged women in Glasgow, how she established the clinical service there, and how she challenged stereotypes. It was inspiring. The panel discussion that followed, with local representatives from health, social work, Women's Aid and the Procurator Fiscal, was equally inspiring and demonstrates what is achievable in a local partnership setting of different agencies working well together. I know I can wax lyrical about how wonderful Shetland is, and it is, but it is blighted by domestic abuse and violence against women and girls, just as much as towns and cities are across the country. So how do we change it? Obviously, awareness raising, like the annual international campaign against gender-based violence, to keep the issue in the public eye. But like Dr. Hepburn, we should challenge stereotypes when we come across them. Education is the key, and not necessarily restricted to young people's education. What the panel discussion left the audience with was a plea, which I did hear, for societal change. The example of drink driving was given. That used to be acceptable, but it no longer is. And that shift in what society previously viewed as acceptable has taken decades to work through. Can we do the same when it comes to violence against women and girls? I think we must. Scotland's new domestic abuse law quite rightly shone a light on what was previously unseen violence. The new legislation has been held up as the world's gold standard by international expert Professor Evan Stark, and already we're seeing the benefits of it. People are much more aware of what coercive control is, and cases are coming through the court system. What now needs to happen is to change the ingrained, centuries-old patriarchal views of women and girls in our society, the unconscious bias that starts from when we are born. It can't happen overnight. This place is an important role to play, and we in it have a collective responsibility to lead and change, however that may be, to make sure that there are never any unintended adverse consequences for women and girls. No one should be subjected to violence.
Ruth Maguire, followed by Sarah Boyack.
Presiding Officer, I'm grateful to Rona Mackay for bringing this debate to the Chamber, but I'm going to confess to being quite sad and angry as well. Violence against women perpetrated by men is a symptom and a cause of women's inequality. Most women and girls will have been affected by harassment or violence perpetrated by men at some point in their life. It isn't all men, but it is all women. Women cannot fix this inequality, cannot address the burning injustice of workplace sexual harassment, domestic abuse, so-called honour crimes, sexual assault, rape, trafficking, stalking and prostitution ourselves. If we could, we would have done it a long time ago. 16 days is an opportunity for men to show by their actions and not just by their words or the badges on their lapels that they're allies in this fight for an equal society, and an equal society will benefit us all. It's 2019, but in some ways it feels like the world is less equal and more dangerous for women and girls, not safer. Of course, progress has been made in some areas, but there are others where it feels like we're going backwards. At a time where we have Teen Vogue suggesting prostitution as a job like any other to girls and young women, I'm grateful that the Scottish Government are clear on their position on this violence and, importantly, are considering a more robust approach to tackling male demand for prostituted women and girls. Because as long as our bodies are objectified, commodified and reduced to something to be bought and sold, used and traded, we won't have equality, we won't have justice, and women and girls will continue to suffer violence. Presiding Officer, 90 women have been murdered by their male partners in the UK so far this year. 90 women. The sheer scale of that moved me to tears on Monday, which was, of course, International Day to End Violence Against Women. Karen and Gala Smith each year tweets out from the Counting Dead Women account to commemorate women whose lives have been taken from them by men. It's very difficult reading, but so important in showing the scale, which is often lost in individual news reports. I thank Karen for that difficult work and would commend it to colleagues in the Chamber. And increasingly, as Joan McAlpine mentioned, we're seeing women and girls killed and injured in violence that's claimed to be consensual. In the UK, at the end of 2018, there was a great outcry at the sentencing of a partner of a young woman, Natalie Connolly, to 3 years and 8 months for her manslaughter. He'd claimed in his defence that Natalie had consented to rough sex, including beating, and to sex acts that caused her horrific internal injury. The Crown Prosecution Service decided not to pursue a murder charge against him. The campaign We Can't Consent to This have found 59 UK women who've been killed by men who claim sex game has gone wrong. And in the last 5 years, that defence was successful in 9 of the 18 killings of a woman which reached trial, with the man being found not guilty or receiving a manslaughter conviction. Sex game gone wrong must not become the new she was asking for it defence. I agree with We Can't Consent to This, who do not believe that women can consent to their grievous injury or death, and certainly don't invite the male violence that kills them. Presiding Officer, I see I'm out of time. I could speak all night about this. Part of the reason I'm a little bit angry as well as sad is that yet again we find ourselves in a half-empty chamber with a couple of noble exceptions listening to females speak about this. Men need to step up. This is about male violence, and I need to hear from our male colleagues.
Sarah Boyack, followed by James Dornan.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. I also want to congratulate Rona Mackay for bringing this to the Chamber tonight. There is something shocking that 20 years after our Parliament was set up, that we still have massive inequalities. And violence against women, I want to focus both on the progress we need to make, but also what more we need to do. And in her very opening comments, Rona Mackay rightly mentioned social and economic injustice. And I just want to focus on the workplace, because tackling violence against women, it is important that we focus on the workplace. It's important to tackle the barriers that women face at work, but also to think about how we empower them and how we promote equality. Now, Margaret Mitchell talked about trafficking. We've mentioned the inequalities and the abuse that takes place in terms of exploitation of employment, particularly of young girls who've been trafficked to this country. Rhoda Grant gave a chilling experience of one of her constituents. But I want to focus on the work that has been done by Close the Gap to attempt to tackle the work in our local authorities to support them in improving their employment practice by addressing the barriers that women face at work. It's a very practical initiative, and I think that's important. It enables employers to progress work and gender equality and better support victim survivors of violence against women. So as part of that programme, councils have developed policies against violence against women, delivered internal awareness-raising campaigns, organised training for line managers and flexible working, and reviewed employment policies and run a whole variety of awareness-raising events. Now, those things don't sound like headline issues, but if that was rolled out across all of our councils, across our public sector, across the private sector as well, that would begin to help empower women and to deliver equality. Because in order to end violence against women in the workplace, we've got to tackle women's labour market inequality as well. Violence against women is both a cause and a consequence of gender inequality. So we've got to tackle occupational segregation, toxic male-orientated workplace cultures, the undervaluation of women's work and the lack of quality, part-time and flexible roles, and an end to the gig economy. So progress cannot be made in preventing violence against women in or out with the workplace without having that centre stage. It's been said tonight already that one or three or four women experience domestic abuse in their lifetime in Scotland. But 3/4 of women are actually targeted at work. Perpetrators of domestic abuse often use workplace resources such as phones and emails to threaten, harass or abuse their current or former partner, acquaintance or stranger. So perpetrator tactics such as sabotage, stalking and harassment at work affect women's performance at work, their levels of absenteeism and job retention, as well as being an utterly horrible experience for women to go through. So action by employers is vital, especially if we can take a lead, and I hope that's something that the Minister might focus on in her time, what the Scottish Government can do more of to deliver on this issue. Because as I said at the start, 20 years on, it isn't acceptable that we still have massive inequalities, massive experience of violence against women in our society, but in our workplace as well. And I hope that 20 years' time, our successors will not be having this debate, because we will have achieved both equality and we will have tackled violence against women. Thank you.
James Dornan, followed by Jackie Bailey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'd like to start by thanking Rona Mackay for bringing this debate to the Chamber. As always, this is an extremely important debate. And I was delighted to meet up with Emma last night at the Glass Walls exhibition. I hadn't realised that Daisy had contributed all the, well, if not all, most of the small windows. And it was great to see my favourite constituency organisation participating in such a great event. I have a lot of good organisations in my constituency, but I can say this in complete honesty, that the one that gives me the most pride is the Daisy organisation. The work they do has saved lives and has made people's lives much, much better. The figure that Ruth Maguire just gave us in her very powerful contribution, about 90 women dead, is horrific. But the truth, and I think I know this from speaking to people that have come through Daisy and the Waves project with them, is that we're lucky it's not more. There's a lot of women out there that were maybe just one more blow or one more bad night or whatever away from being another statistic. And that, as has already been said, is quite rightly not the woman's fault. It's our fault. It's a male problem. Sometimes when I hear these stories, my gender disgusts me. The things that people can do and they can do to those that for various reasons are under their control, it just disgusts me. On the 6th of December, Margaret Mitchell was saying that there's an event in here on the 6th of December. Coincidentally, on the 6th of December, in my constituency, I'm holding a meeting on women's rights and domestic abuse. And we've got people coming from organisations, women's rights organisations, the legal service, police, social work. I believe that the Minister for Equalities has been invited, and I'm not sure if she or some of our officers are coming, but I do know that the community organisations will be there as well, because the more we can get this out in the community, the more we can talk about it, the better it is. At the end of October, I'd like to finish talking about just this aspect of abuse, which I don't think gets enough publicity. At the end of October, we had a meeting in the Parliament. And it was a meeting of organisations and women who have been victims of financial coercion. And some of the tales were absolutely horrific. Some of us have received an email today from one of the women who gave her evidence. And she's saying, to a great extent, that he still controls her. She's been away for 18 months, he still controls her. He's still got that coercive control on her because of finance. And, you know, it's bad enough having lived that life, thinking you've escaped it, and finding that you haven't, and sometimes that can last for 15 or 20 years, is just, it must be utterly soul-destroying. And I met some of my friends and spoke to them about it, and they were saying that's exactly what happens, and some of them are still living through that. There's so much has to be done. We have to take a responsibility. John was quite right to raise it in the first place. Men have to be part of the solution. This can't work if we don't get behind it. And I think that if we can encourage other people, other males to get behind it, and I do know there was other males here earlier on so who are very supportive of this, but the more we can encourage other males to get behind this and make sure that that sense of equality and that the reality of equality happens over the near future as opposed to the far distant future, the better for all of us. So I just want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak in this debate, and thanks very much.
The last of the open debate contributions is from Jackie Bailey.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and let me join with others in thanking Rona Mackay on securing this subject for debate this evening. I am pleased to see such a large turnout of members, and let me congratulate the Zero Tolerance campaign in just reminding members of the importance of marking the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. There is more work to do, and we need to keep this as a top priority for this Parliament. I was very pleased to have led the first debate in the Scottish Parliament on tackling domestic abuse and to have been the first minister in the Scottish Government with responsibility for this policy area. I should, of course, advise the Chamber I started very young. Both then and now, this Parliament has come together to tackle gender-based violence, irrespective of party, and that is a very important strength. Successive governments have passed legislation and put much-needed funding in place to support the work of prevention campaigns like Zero Tolerance and funded practical support like the £10 million Domestic Abuse Development Fund to ensure refuge provision in all parts of Scotland. I was particularly pleased to see a new refuge being built in my constituency as a result, and I pay tribute to Dumbarton Women's Aid for all of their much-valued work. I was struck by the Women's Aid briefing for this debate that spoke about their Census Day figures, a snapshot of one day in September where 1,235 women, children and young people were supported by a Women's Aid group in Scotland. 364 women and 349 children were living in a refuge on this day alone, and 58% of the women asking for a refuge space on the same day had to be turned away. So there is clearly much to be done, and I would urge the Minister to consider how the government can put in place long-term sustainable funding to ensure that those very specialist domestic abuse services are available in every part of Scotland. Now, I want to touch briefly on other aspects of this year's campaign and regret that a 4-minute speech cannot hope to do this justice. But as others have said, the theme this year is Generation Equality Stands Against Rape. The fact that 1 in 10 women have experienced rape in Scotland, 1 in 5 have had someone try to make them have sex against their will are truly shocking statistics. Rape crises provide important support for women affected by rape, but we do need to get better at prosecuting rape, both in terms of the number of convictions and the length of sentences, to send the strongest possible signal about our view of such a crime. Now, Western Berkshire, which includes my own constituency of Dumbarton, has one of the highest reported levels of domestic abuse in Scotland. The Council and its partners in Women's Aid, Rape Crisis and other organisations working to stop men's violence against women and children have worked together to challenge the experience of women and children in my community. Last week, they organised a groundbreaking conference, which I know has been welcomed by my colleague Gil Patterson as well, because it involved local communities in considering the role that they can play in challenging inequality and tackling domestic abuse, experienced perhaps by friends or by relatives or by neighbours. This is a positive development, and I commend them for it. And I agree with John Finney. This is a problem with men. It's not a woman's problem that we have to deal with. We do suffer the consequences of it, but the cause is about men. Ultimately, Presiding Officer, the prize has to be prevention. It is, of course, important to treat the consequences of the problem and provide women and children with support, but it would be so much better if we could tackle the source of the problem. This is fundamentally, as others have said, about inequality, an imbalance of power between men and women, whether it's economic, social or political power. And it is only when we challenge gender inequality in our schools, our workplaces, our communities, and change society's attitudes that we will be able to end gender-based violence.
I now call Christina McKelvey to respond to the debate for around 7 minutes or so, Minister.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and there's been a fantastic debate actually with so many things in it. I've scribbled notes all over this. If I don't get to everybody's issue, please give me a shout and I will get to you after the debate and answer the issue, because there were so many raised in the debate. Can I pay my tribute and my thanks to Rona Mackay for bringing forward this motion to mark the 16 days of activism to end gender-based violence. It is this 16 days where we put the spotlight on what we are doing, but I would hope that by the end of my contribution you will realise that in government, across our organisations and across this chamber and across all of our parties, I believe that we are working 365 days to end gender-based violence. Violence against women and girls is one of the most devastating and fundamental violations of human rights. We've heard that today. It is never, ever acceptable. It has to stop, and meaningful action must be taken to stop it. It is the responsibility of every single one of us in society and every community to send a clear message that violence and abuse is unacceptable and call out the behaviour and the choices of the perpetrators. 16 days of activism is an opportunity for us to come together, as we have done, to give new momentum to our ambitions and the campaigns that we all know about, but also to mark just how far we have come too. Through the implementation of our Equally Safe strategy, the Scottish Government is strengthening the law, investing in our services and driving a whole system approach and response that places the survivor at its heart. But we recognise very clearly that much, much more needs to be done. We have just published our updated Equally Safe report, and I would commit that to all members and anyone else in the chamber who would be interested in that. Can I pick up some of the points that some people raised in the debate? Sarah Boyack asked about Equally Safe and talked about Equally Safe in the workplace, and hopefully she'll be aware that that's a piece of work that's ongoing, and we've been piloting that. We did commit to doing this piece of work over the next few years, but we did publish an action plan in February this year. It's been piloted. Can I pay tribute to Councillor Mary Donnelly, who's in the gallery today, who is one of the councillors who's driving this forward in South Lanarkshire, where there is a pilot, so please be reassured that we hear you and we are working with others to make sure that happens. Can I also say that being an absolutely lovely dog lover myself, I am off to the Dogs Trust first thing tomorrow morning to view their Freedom Project, because I know from many people that I've met, knowing that your pet's safe and you can take that break and get away from a situation is an incredibly important thing to do. And as we all know, we all love our doggies, but I'll be looking forward to seeing the very important work they do, just putting minds at rest tomorrow. Rhoda Grant also asked about data and I wanted to get a clear answer on data. She will be aware that we have established a sex and gender data working group to develop guidance and best practice and to consider how best to use that. So that disaggregation of data and how we use it, we are doing some work on that, and I'll certainly look into the Police Scotland issue that she has brought up in her contribution today too. Like Ruth Maguire, I feel a bit sad. I think I've spoken in just about every debate that this Chamber's ever had on this topic, and I do remember watching a youthful Jackie Bailey in that very first debate at the Scottish Parliament when I was a young social worker person at the time as well. But I do remember that, and it's always been a mark of this place to realise that one of the first things that we tackled as the Scottish Parliament was established 20 years ago was domestic violence and violence against women. Presiding Officer, many members may have seen the article that I have written for the Scotsman on Monday, where I said we should never stop being shocked, and we should never stop being shocked about the debate that we're having today and the impact that it has on people. James Donnan talked about the financial control, the coercive control and behaviour. We know we do have our groundbreaking Domestic Abuse Act. It is now in force, and we have been, you know, all of the issues around about coercive control and behaviour was so eloquently highlighted by Beatrice Wishart and her contribution too. We are committed to bringing forward further legislation on domestic abuse protection orders, which I think is another step forward. I see the presiding officer smiling because that's one of the things that she has been asking for a while, and we're working towards that too. We're also taking steps to drive improvements in our response to rape and sexual assault. The Health Secretary this morning introduced the Forensic Medical Services Victims of Sexual Offences Bill to Parliament, and we are supporting a pilot to visually record rape complainers' initial statements to police, and we are working to ensure that survivors get access to support through additional investment in frontline services. And that takes me to Rape Crisis and the work they do and paying tribute to the work they do. The stamp work that they do in schools around about sexual violence and consent, and the Rape Crisis Support to Report scheme has created some of that, you know, work that we are now facing now. We are investing record amounts of money in frontline services, about £12 million, and we had some additional money added to the rape crisis centres last year. The three-year round of funding is coming to an end, so as soon as the budget is resolved, I will be able to resolve all of the funding issues, hopefully, that everybody has raised here today. But it's absolutely vital, Presiding Officer, that we keep our focus on ending all forms of violence against women, and that we move forward with a shared understanding of the underlying casual story of all the violence that needs to change and to end for good. And we've had many highlighted in here, the need for tackling prostitution, human trafficking, and all of the other issues that go around that. A huge amount has been achieved this year, but we shouldn't just rest on our laurels and think about what we've done. I want to take this opportunity to pay tribute to many of the feminist activists who are here today and not here today, and the ones who have worked every single day to consign this issue to the dustbin of history, but we still have work to do. Some of us are all wearing our orange badges today from the Sir Optimus, some of us are wearing our white ribbons, but we all wear our badges with pride, and we know about the importance of men as allies using the White Ribbon campaign to do that. Presiding Officer, my article on Monday paid tribute to Fiona Druitt, who tragically lost her daughter Emily to suicide following domestic abuse, and who has been absolutely relentless in driving forward change in universities and colleges. It's been an immense privilege to work with Fiona on these issues, and I really look forward to continuing to do so. I want to conclude my remarks, Presiding Officer, because many members like me, and have already mentioned it, have visited the glass wall art installation in the Parliament. It's a wonderful piece of work. I have known Emma now for a couple of years, where this project was just a wee idea. To see it manifested in our Parliament was an absolute joy today, and James Donnan is absolutely right to highlight and tribute the work of the Daisy Project. This is an inspiring example of the power of the Daisy women, telling their stories through the medium of art. And I commend Dr. Emma Forbes, Charlie Forbes, and Brian Waugh, and the talented artistic team of men and women who have worked with the project. What this installation tells me, Presiding Officer, is that we need to ensure that we have the lived experience of women at the heart of everything we do to tackle violence against women and girls, and build a Scotland where everyone can live equally safe. And I want to finish with the words of that artwork. We do believe you. Your word is enough, and we walk with purpose. Thank you.
That concludes the debate.